And we're live. Hello everybody. I'm Dr. Talia Marcagiani, and this is a live video. I'm trying something new. So today we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of human nutrition. I'm going to be using an article that I wrote that I published on my blog that you can check out, and I'll post the link below, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion. So this should take us about an hour, so feel free to take breaks to save this for later and just listen to the audio. There's not going to be a ton of exciting visuals to follow, so you can definitely just listen to this on your commute or while doing work. So welcome, and feel free to comment, ask questions, and let's give this a shot. And then I'll upload this video to YouTube if you're more of a YouTuber. So I was inspired to do this article about the do's and don'ts of human nutrition after a lot of things were going on in social media and the media in general. So you may have noticed a few months ago there was this article circulating where the American Heart Association published this sort of review article warning the public about coconut oil and saying it's not a health food, be careful about coconut oil, it contains saturated fat and that's going to kill you and cause heart disease. And everybody was all confused. And then Netflix released a documentary called What the Health, which is essentially evangelizing veganism. And there were a bunch of health claims in that video about how diabetes is caused by fat in the blood and that you shouldn't eat meat because it's horrible for your health. And so people were getting really influenced by that because it was an extremely convincing documentary, and then it just had such a wide reach on Netflix. And so I was getting all of these emails in my inbox from people and comments, and people were sending me some of these articles and asking me, like, what's going on? Like, some patients were writing to me being like, you told me to put coconut oil in my smoothie. And another patient with this anemia that we were trying to solve was like, I'm going vegan. And one of the risk factors of a vegan diet is just very low iron. So if you're already anemic, it could potentially be problematic, but she was so swayed by this video. So the first don't of the do's and don'ts of human nutrition is don't freak out. So it seems like every new nutrition-focused Yahoo News article sort of like lifts this protective rock over our health-conscious sort of identities and just sends us scuttling frantically for cover, like when you lift a rock off of garden grubs and they go scrambling back into the darkness. So you can't really blame us, because even me, who studies health and nutrition for a living, like, I'm obsessed with this stuff. I'm constantly listening to things, and I'm trying to get a wide range of information. So I listen to vegan podcasters, and I read different kinds of health studies, and I listen to paleo people and keto people, and I try all these different diets on myself to see how I feel. And you can't exactly extrapolate my body to all of my patients' bodies, but it gives some firsthand perspective. So even I find myself caught up in this health claim of ping pong, like, am I killing myself by eating all this fat? And then I start to doubt, and I have to go back to the research. Like, how can one claim be true if the complete opposite claim is being made? Like, is coconut oil the next belly-blasting superfood, or is it the devil incarnate and it's going to kill us all and we're all going to regret it? Do vegan diets cure diabetes, with their higher levels relatively of carbohydrates, or do they cause it? Or, like, what's the thing? So it's like this ping pong ball going back and forth where we're constantly confused. And unless you're able to really analyze the research and understand the context, it's super confusing and anxiety provoking. But the first thing that you want to do before getting into all of this is to understand the power of food. Under all of this frenzy of information is this understanding that food is actually a huge influence in our health and well-being. So, I mean, if there's one diet that's right for humans, then we certainly haven't found it in nutritional research. Because one of the problems with finding a standardized, perfect human diet is that humans aren't gerbils. Like, you can't just give us a bowl of food that is everything you need, like in the Matrix, which my brother fantasizes about. He's like, why can't we just eat this gruel that contains everything we need? We can't, because as humans, our food serves various functions. So a good diet, yeah, it provides us with fuel, it prevents disease, it promotes health, but it's also, we can't deny that food is also a source of pleasure. It soothes emotional pain. and that can be problematic in some people, but that is one of the functions of food in our society. It gives us something to look forward to. Like, how many times have you promised your kids food-related rewards? Or I know when I was a kid, I was promised food-related rewards all the time. It serves as a reward for ourselves, even as adults, for our loved ones, for our children. It takes center stage during celebrations. It's all about the food. You get stuff catered, you get a cake, you make things for each other. It supports social cohesion. There's always food at get-togethers. It encourages meeting attendance. There are always donuts, some kind of snack at AA meetings, church meetings, community meetings. It encourages blood donations. When I was a student, people would go and give blood, which is a wonderful thing to do, and then they'd enjoy the donuts that they have for you afterwards to balance your blood sugar, because you're just losing so much blood. So food allows us to wallow in the luxury of our senses, to commune with the divine in terms of its spiritual practice. There's always food involved in foods we avoid, in fasting, in eating. And eating and making food serve as hobbies and creative outlets and so on. So it holds a sacred place in virtually every human culture. Every human culture has rituals and traditions around food. And as a naturopathic doctor, there's another layer. I use food as medicine. So it's not just that a healthy diet prevents disease and keeps you healthy, it's that food can actually be a medicine to reverse disease that's impending. The food we eat has the power to reverse disease and promote health. And with conditions like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and mental health conditions on the rise, it becomes imperative that we make an effort to understand the health impact of our food choices, and that we don't give up, and we don't despair, and we don't crawl back under the rock of protection. So understanding the do's and don'ts of nutrition can help us harness the power of food to heal the body and prevent disease. And there's always going to be exceptions to everything I say, so, but we can always add those to the discussion. So, be critical of nutritional research. So nutritional research, while essential for separating the gluten-filled wheat from the chaff, is flawed in many regards. So because well-controlled long-term clinical trials on compliant humans are nearly impossible to do, much of the nutritional research comes from epidemiological studies, and these studies establish a relationship between two isolated variables, such as food and a health outcome. So for example, red meat consumption and colon cancer, and they see if they're related. And so how we study drugs is you get two groups. One group is given a placebo, and one group is given the active drug. And both of and you control for every variable, including, taking a pill. That's a variable that's controlled for by placebo. The expectations, control for lifestyle factors and risk factors and age and weight, and all of the factors that we know about we control for. And the only thing that's influenced or changed is whether someone's getting an active pill or a placebo. In nutritional studies, that's impossible because there are so many variables that are interacting, and we can't for 30 years sort of like restrict somebody's diet in a very extreme way. It's hardly ethical, let alone possible. But so we do these epidemiological studies that establish correlations, and they're also based on something called food frequency questionnaires, which is like if you're part of one of these big epidemiological studies, they'll take all this data on you, whether you're a smoker, how often you exercise, and they'll kind of call you up every 6 months and be like, okay, Talia, how many times did you have bacon in the last 6 months? And I'll be like, twice. Which I have no idea, I don't remember, think about what you had yesterday. Like when I ask my patients to give me a diet recall, a 24-hour diet recall from yesterday, it's like, and then we compare it to a diet diary where they're actually tracking food in real time, totally different. So the accuracy even of those food frequency questionnaires is questionable. But when evaluating these studies, it's important not to confuse correlation with causation. So this is what happened in the 1950s when this famous guy that you may have heard about before, if you're into nutrition at all, Ancel Keys, published his famous 7-country study. And this is the study that is responsible for all of the problems that we have and all the confusion around fat intake. So in this study, he linked saturated fat intake and coronary artery disease. And so his findings led us to toss out our bacon and egg breakfast in lieu of spending the next 60 years munching on fat-free yogurt, full of sugar, and sugary cereals, right? That have the heart-healthy stamp on them. The second ingredient is sugar, like looking at you, all-brand Buds or all-brand Cheerios. So Keys assumed that because saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and heart disease were linked in the 7 countries he included data for, and there's more to this story. I mean, he omitted data, so there's more things that are problematic with the study than just the correlation causation issue. But he assumed that the relationship between these factors was causal. So we know from current research that this is just not true. Correlation does not equal causation. You cannot establish whether something happened because of something else simply because things are related and occur together. So, for example, other things that correlate with an increased incidence of heart disease beyond saturated fat are paying tax in Sweden and owning multiple TV sets. So you can't say, okay, I'm just not gonna ever go to Sweden, and if I ever go to Sweden, I'll never pay tax there, and then I'm going to lower my risk of heart disease. Or I'm not gonna own any TV sets, and then I won't get heart disease. So obviously, paying taxes may give you chest pain, but it's definitely not going to lower your heart disease risk, or avoiding paying taxes, sorry. So nutrition researchers, they attempt to account for as many relevant lifestyle variables as possible, but there are many that they miss. So they may record whether participants smoked or drank or exercised, like these obvious variables that we know influence our health. But are they looking at everything? They can't, because there are things that when these studies began we didn't know about. Like, we didn't know about the microbiome. We still don't know hardly anything about the microbiome. So we don't know about the status of these people's microbiome. They don't know even how they prepared their meat. Like, did they season it with rosemary and jerk spices? There's a study that I linked to that shows that when you barbecue meat, just seasoning it properly reduces the carcinogens that can occur from heating meat to high temperatures. So all of these tiny variables can have a huge impact on whether eating a food increases risk for a certain disease or not. And so this can be problematic because when we fail to include everything, we're bound to miss something, and that something could lead us in the wrong direction, providing nutrition advice that's just not sound for most people. And so while nutrition research is essential for understanding how food interacts in our bodies, I'm not saying we should stop epidemiological research. It's extremely important. That's how we establish whether smoking is a risk factor for disease. But we certainly need to take most studies with a grain of salt, which a new study shows has no impact on your blood pressure. So there you go. And you can check out the link for that in the original article. So what can we do? So there are lots of things. We have to look at context. We have to take everything into account. So one thing we can do is pay attention to what healthy traditional societies ate. So speaking of salt, any human nutrition article wouldn't be worth its weight in it without mentioning the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, who was a Canadian, woohoo, Canada, and he was a dentist who lived at the turn of the 20th century. And this is a really critical period in time when our food was becoming more industrialized. And so he was noticing this rise in tooth decay in his patients. He was living in the States at the time, and he was suspecting that it was diet-related. So what he did was set out on a 10-year journey in the 1930s to find the perfect diet. And he did this by analyzing what traditional societies ate. So he studied populations in remote Swiss villages in the Americas, African tribes, Australia and New Zealand, and the Melanesian and Polynesian South Sea Islanders. And he took meticulous notes, food samples for analyses, and many pictures. And he published all of this in his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And this kind of research can't really be done today. Like, even if you visit more native populations that have been relatively untouched by modern society, their diets have still been corrupted because of this globalized culture that we live in today. So it was the timing, the meticulousness of his research that actually were super valuable for us to understand what human populations ate. And so while many of the populations he studied had also begun to experience the creeping influence of an industrialized food economy, others had still managed to retain their native diets. So they were still eating what they had always eaten. But due to globalization and its effects on traditional communities, we can never do this type of study today. And so what Price found was that some populations exhibited incredible characteristics of robust health. And remember, he was a dentist, so he was focusing a lot on teeth. But teeth are a marker for overall health as well as bone health. So he noticed that certain populations had these perfect decay-free, straight teeth, flawless facial and jaw structures which indicate healthy bones. But he also noticed that they had virtually no diseases. Like, they didn't have any cancer, and there were no autoimmune disease in these populations across generations. He also noticed that when the healthy population's diet consisted of a variety of... So these diets consisted of a variety of foods and macronutrients, right? but there were some important commonalities. So that's also really valuable because there were some foods that eat extremely high-fat diets while others were more vegetarian. But there were things that they all had in common compared to the populations that were experiencing more tooth decay and had and were experiencing more disease. So what he found, first of all, was don't consume processed foods. So the first thing that Dr. Price found was that the healthiest populations somehow managed to avoid the flood of industrial food products. They refrained from eating refined flours, sugars, food additives, and vegetable oils, these processed seed oils, and stuck to their native diets of meat, eggs, dairy, fish, fruits, and vegetables. Okay. Things that you can find wild, that you can grow, that require minimal amount of processing and cooking. He noticed that once processed foods began to creep into a population's diet, dental decay and degenerative diseases such as cancers tended to quickly follow, and this tended to affect these generations of good health that these populations had experienced. So don't eat anything in the article I say your grandmother wouldn't recognize, but I would like to change that to your great-grandmother. So Michael Pollan, because your grandmother may be eating all brown buds, as mine does. Michael Pollan, author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, reminds us of some simple food rules. So he has this famous phrase that I really like because it's so basic, but just easy to remember and really accurate. And it's eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Great. So in his book, Pollan clearly differentiates between food, like real food, something your great-grandmother would recognize, and something made from a plant, but not like made in a plant, not from one, and edible food-like products, which tend to increasingly populate our grocery stores, kitchen cupboards, and bodies. So these are not quite foods. We can still eat them, but they offer no food value. So refined sugars and vegetable oils have increased exponentially in the average diet in the past few decades. Part of this is because of that low-fat trend that we've been following for decades. But so have metabolic diseases such as cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. So despite trying to avoid fat to lower our risk of heart disease, we've done the opposite. We've increased our risk of heart disease by avoiding fat and replacing it with these other foods. It seems like the entire food industry, from the way grocery stores are set up, to the way foods are marketed to consumers, to the promotion of a culture of snacking, is built around encouraging the consumption of processed edible food-like products rather than real foods. And there's so many reasons for this, but the book The Dorito Effect outlines how the food industry engineers processed foods to contain taste, textures, and chemicals that override our body's hunger and satiation signals in order to monopolize our cravings, leading us to overeat. So the more we steer clear of these packaged, processed, and overproduced food-like products, the better we're going to do at promoting our health. You want to stick with whole foods. Do stick with whole foods. So stick with consuming what Michael Pollan classifies as actual food. Whole substances that come from plants and animals that resemble how they are found in nature and that usually exist in the periphery of the grocery store. That's not always the case. You can find olive oil and avocado oil and legumes and sardines in the middle of the aisles. But for the most part, on the periphery are the fresh fruits and vegetables and foods. Okay. And meats and things. So prepare food at home as much as possible. Avoid foods in packages, especially those that contain more than 5 ingredients, especially if those ingredients listed are unpronounceable or something your average 5th grader wouldn't recognize. Okay? What is maltodextrin? Where does maltodextrin grow? How do you get it? You probably need a plant. You probably need a factory. You probably need to process it. You need to take corn. You need to do a lot of stuff to this corn to get maltodextrin. When you see maltodextrin on a package, you're looking at a processed food. How do you get corn oil? Where's the oil in corn? Corn is very low fat if you just look at corn on the cob or like corn kernels. So corn oil is a highly processed food. And it's problematic in other ways as well. As early as the 1930s, Dr. Weston A. Price was already noting an increase in tooth decay and jaw malformation in children who were consuming the industrialized processed foods that were beginning to enter the North American diet. And that was already in the 1930s, but since then our consumption of processed foods, refined sugars, vegetable oils, and flours has increased and so have our incidences of chronic lifestyle-related diseases. Therefore, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Some things to avoid that can be, a gray area for a lot of people, I would say, are store-bought salad dressings. These often contain soy oil, canola oil. These are the processed oils. Cereals, breakfast cereals, avoid those. You can make your own using seeds. You can make your own granola pretty easily. There's tons of recipes on the internet. Avoid fat-free yogurt. It has added sugar to make up for the lack of taste from the yogurt, usually highly processed. And there was a memo in the early 1900s where they told farmers, give your pigs fat-free dairy to encourage them to eat. And that's the best way to fatten them up. So actually, the less fat in our dairy, the worse off it is, the more fattening it is because it's less satiating. And like these kind of crackers and processed things like that. But those are 3. All right, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, and animals, actually. So, do consume animal products. Dr. Price found that every population he studied consumed some form of high-nutrient animal product. So let me say that again. No population that he studied was vegan. They simply didn't exist. While some populations were vegetarian, consuming raw dairy products, none were vegan. And none of these vegetarian populations, it's worth mentioning, were vegetarian by choice. There was usually a part of their culture or religion or just the availability of the food that prevented them from eating meat. Most of the populations ate what they could and what was available to them that was nutrient dense. So every healthy population consumes some combination of fish, organ meats, insects, eggs, and dairy from pastured animals. All animals consumed were obtained from nature and ate their natural diet. So that's also really important because a lot of the meat you buy in the grocery store are not from animals eating their natural diet. So cows don't actually eat corn, they eat grass. And this actually affects the health of the cows, the health of the meat, the environment. It has a lot of effects. So cows ate grass, poultry ate grubs, grass, and worms. Chickens actually, they eat insects in the grass and they don't eat corn unless we force them to. These populations consume the entire animal, favoring nutrient-rich organs over muscle meat. Another interesting thing. So they would prefer liver and kidneys and heart over like a chicken breast. Liver was highly valued, and it is a food that's extremely rich in tons of nutrients that are pretty deficient in our culture. They used bones to make gelatin, which provides a source of bone, skin, and connective tissue building collagen. And so I often encourage my patients to kind of add collagen into their smoothies, but in these traditional cultures, they would eat bone broths or they would eat tendons and connective tissues. And actually, most of the animal is collagen and connective tissue. So that was a huge chunk of their diet. It wasn't just 2 tablespoons a day. That you can kind of bring, we can shift a little bit back there by adding a bit of collagen or gelatin to our diet, making bone broth, things like that. I'll take a sip from my mug. See, I don't need therapy. I have a dog. Coco, the working man's therapist. So obtaining enough organ meats, fish, egg yolks, and grass-fed beef and dairy allowed the healthiest populations to achieve 10 times the dietary intake of fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K than the typical North American. And we're still pretty deficient in these vitamins. Vitamin D, the deficiency rate is like in the 90%. So, I see a like from somebody. Thank you. Yeah, vitamin D, guys. But also A, E, and K as well. And they all work together, these vitamins. And and I'll say a little bit more about vitamin D. So someone's asking, what about coconut oil? And we're right there. So, do consume fat. Okay. So the healthiest populations that Dr. Price studied consumed anywhere from 30 to 80% of their total calories from fat. So, the lowest fat populations was about 30% fat, which is still pretty decent. It's a decent amount of fat. Definitely not fat-free. Most of these fats were saturated, obtained from animal sources, and also heart-healthy monounsaturated fats obtained from, so you can get monounsaturated fats from avocados, olives, and macadamia nuts. Those are the richest sources. So those are like, that's not debatable. Everyone agrees that olive oil is good for you. But only 4% of the fat that they consumed in these nutritional populations came from polyunsaturated fats. So the polyunsaturated fats are those industrial processed seed oils like soy and canola and corn oil, but also from nuts and seeds and even fish. So fish oil is good for us because it balances out that omega-3 to 6 ratio, but we don't want to depend on those polyunsaturated fats as the primary source of our of the fat in our diet. And the reason for this is that they're not heat stable. So even in the body, especially with a deficiency of antioxidants in the body, these oils can tend to go rancid and promote inflammation. And many of them are rancid already off the shelf. So even fish oils, if there's no vitamin E in your fish oil, the potential for it to go rancid quickly is very high. We can talk more about that if people have more questions about that. So coming back to coconut oil, as a saturated fat, it's actually very heat stable and stable in the body. And then coconut oil also has a few other properties that are useful, such as medium chain triglycerides, which your brain uses as fuel immediately, so that can keep blood sugar stable. It can actually help with brain function because your brain loves, it can, once it uses up the glucose from your meal, and if you're giving it medium chain triglycerides, it can use those as fuel, making ketone bodies, so you kind of get this good ability to concentrate and focus for longer periods of time. And then in these medium chain triglycerides, there are these fatty acids like caprylic acid and capric acid and lauric acid that are antimicrobial and that can help rebalance the microbiome. So there's actual benefit to coconut oil in particular. If you gorge on coconut oil, potentially you can gain weight, right? There's calories in coconut oil, and it's not that calories are the end-all be-all of a healthy diet or how to evaluate if your diet is healthy, but it's important if you're worried about your weight. But that being said, I did an experiment on myself where I eat a lot of coconut oil daily. I'll eat coconut oil, and I go to Costco and get those massive drums of coconut oil, and I'm probably in the last year on my fourth one. And I eat coconut cream and I eat coconut milk, and my triglycerides, which is one of the biggest risk factors for heart disease, are extremely low, and my HDL cholesterol is very high, and my LDL is good, normal. And so what's really important for preventing heart disease is low triglycerides, low inflammation. So my inflammation is also really low, and that has a lot to do with gut health. And my total cholesterol to HDL ratio is low, which means my HDL is high relative to all of my cholesterol. So just on myself, I saw that coconut oil was actually beneficial for cardiovascular markers. And obviously a cholesterol panel needs to be interpreted in a more functional way. We focus a lot on LDL cholesterol. It's not just LDL that's the problem. There's so many other factors. So it's not this this causes, high cholesterol causes heart disease. It's far more complex than that. So although it's been vilified for years in North America, fat is essential to the human diet. So it builds our bones, our brains, our nervous system, our hormones, and our cell membranes. It keeps all the stuff in our cells. The cell membranes are like the skin for our cells. So fat is a fuel source for our brains. It aids our bodies in blood sugar regulation, and it aids in the absorption of essential nutrients like our fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D. So contrary to what we've been told for the last few decades, a low-fat diet, rather than a high-fat one, is associated with an increased risk of mortality. And you can check out the link for that study in my original article. A 2017 Lancet study, which observed the diets and disease risk of 135,000 people, found that the total fat intake, including saturated fat, was not associated with any increase in cardiovascular disease or mortality. And the study also found that when saturated fat intake increased, the risk of stroke decreased. So, yes, this is an epidemiological study, one of the ones I warned you about. But you can see how the evidence is conflicting with what we've heard about fat. So These epidemiological studies sort of like give us some information, and then we're supposed to dive deeper and really understand why that could be. Could be another unrelated factor that's causing this decreased risk of stroke, but what we know is that you don't get a stroke because you have a high-fat diet, and you don't die because you have a high-fat diet. So don't, though, consume vegetable oils. Polyunsaturated fats, or PUFAs, P-U-F-A-S, they exist as omega-6, which are found in processed vegetables like corn, soy, and canola oil, and omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in fish, nuts, and seeds. And nuts and seeds have a combo of omega-6 and 3. Healthy human populations generally obtained a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. It's not that the omega-6 are bad, it's that we want to be 1-to-1. We want to be even with our omega-6 and omega-3 intake. The increase in cheap oils, those cheap vegetable oils in our diet, has brought our inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid levels up substantially to a ratio of 10-to-1. So it's the omega-6s tend to be more inflammatory when they are out of balance with our omega-3. A 10-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to 3 is very pro-inflammatory. So we take fish oil to bring that back into balance, or we avoid those processed seed oils. You want to kind of do both, right? Buy organic. Yeah, that's part of it. Organic is going to prevent you from the GMO, right, and the pesticides and the organophosphates. But you can also, yeah. Can you find organic corn oil? Probably not. No. Healthy human populations generally obtained a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s, right? And so vegetable oils like canola, corn, and soy oil require intense chemical processing. They're also, like, where's the oil in corn, right? You need to use tons of bushels of corn, extract the oil using solvents. It's like a whole mess. And corn is very heavily sprayed. So that's a big part of GMO. People are confused about GMO, but a big thing with GMO, it's not so much the genetic modification per se, or we just don't know that yet. But what a problem I have with GMO is that it's typically the genes are modified so that the plants can resist pesticide use. And so rather than sort of spraying on weeds and insects, the plants are just sprayed like crazy because they don't die when they're sprayed with pesticides. So there's just more exposure to these pesticide residues like glyphosate, Roundup, which is sprayed on corn, wheat, soy, and that's like there's just more emerging evidence that glyphosate is just terrible for our hormones and our health and all that stuff. So that's that's part of the GMO debate that I'm concerned about. These oils are very unstable as well, becoming rancid very quickly, and their high omega-6 content promotes inflammation. So avoid these oils whenever possible. Avoid store-bought salad dressings. Avoid packaged foods. Even healthy packaged foods will contain canola oil, soy oil, even those kettle chips. Restaurants. Like, I go to a healthy restaurant and I'm like, oh, instead of the salad dressing that you're adding, can I have just some olive oil and lemon? And they're like, oh, we don't have olive oil. We can add canola oil. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I eat here all the time. Never again. And obviously avoid fried foods. So these oils are unstable. And think about like frying something in fish oil. So fish oil is very unstable as well, but we don't fry things in it. We store it in the fridge or freezer to protect it, and we also package fish oils with some vitamin E to prevent it from going rancid. But we're just taking this corn oil that's packaged in these plastic bottles. It's already probably rancid off the shelf, and then we're deep frying things in it. It's like a whole recipe. It's a huge disaster for inflammation. I'm surprised that we're still standing. So instead, cook from home whenever possible, using the healthier oils from olive, coconut, and avocado, or using butter and ghee. So these like more heat-stable oils. You don't want to be frying in monounsaturated fats like olive and avocado. If you're using higher temperatures, you're going to go for a more shelf-stable, heat-stable oil like butter, ghee, or coconut oil. Okay. Avoiding all trans fats as well. So all of the fats that used to be liquids that are now solids, like margarine, those are trans fats. Stay away. Do consume fermented foods. So here's something you can eat. Our microbiome, the universe of trillions of bacteria. Hi, Erica. Yeah, such a good life topic, yes, thank you. Our microbiome. The universe of trillions of bacteria that live inside of our digestive tracts has become the subject du jour of intense medical research. It's such an exciting field. There was like a whole conference at U of T recently. And the health of our guts has been associated with virtually every disease, from our mental health to our risk of inflammatory, degenerative diseases, to our circadian rhythms and our stress response. But we just don't know fully what to do about it yet. So let's visit Dr. Price again. So what he found was that in the 1930s, he noticed these things in populations that modern science is now confirming, that the healthiest human populations regularly consumed fermented foods like kefir that were rich in healthy probiotics. Kefir is a fermented milk. It's one of the richest sources of dietary probiotics. So these populations soaked, fermented, and sprouted their grains, seeds, and legumes to neutralize their lectins and phytates. So lectins present in grains and legumes can cause inflammation. There's some evidence they can trigger an autoimmune reaction, and phytates are anti-nutrients that prevent the absorption of minerals in the digestive tract. And fermenting, sprouting, pressure cooking as well can neutralize these. So fermentation also supports the health of our gut bacteria and aids in the digestion of various foods. So a huge support to our digestive system. And most of us have really imbalanced digestive systems. And I think that digestion in many cases is the root of a lot of these inflammatory diseases. Most of our immune system is in our gut. Do personalize your diet. So, all that being said, there was a lot of variability in these traditional hunter-gatherer populations. So some, like the Inuit, we call it the Inuit now, but living in northern climates, they ate high fat diet. The Maasai in Kenya, high fat diets. And then other populations consumed higher carbohydrate diets. And they were still all healthy, and they were all grouped into what Dr. Weston A. Price found had lower incidences of disease. But we want to avoid fake foods wherever possible, but there's a significant amount of variability among the foods consumed in human healthy diets. So how do we know what foods are right for you personally? So there's a really cool TED Talk by this guy called Aaron Segal. And what he looked at was blood sugar responses to various types of carbohydrate foods. So we care about blood sugar because when we eat foods high in glucose, carbohydrates essentially, and sugars, our blood glucose levels rise as those carbs are broken down into simple sugars in the digestive tract and then absorbed. I eat a bowl of rice. Rice is like a long chain of carbohydrates. My digestive system, my enzymes from my pancreas are going to chop up that long chain of carbohydrates, and my digestive system is going to absorb those sugars. And those are going to enter my bloodstream and cause different effects. So when we eat foods high in carbohydrates, our blood sugar levels rise as those carbs are broken down and into the digestive tract and absorbed. And so constantly spiking blood sugar levels, when done repeatedly over time, is a recipe for fat gain and increasing our risk of type 2 diabetes. So when our blood sugar spikes, our body releases insulin to control blood sugar, to get the sugar into our cells where we use it as fuel. Like, the sugar is what creates energy so I can give you this video and you can listen. But when blood sugar spikes too high, insulin is released too dramatically. It brings blood sugar down too low. Then we need to eat sugary foods to get it back up again. We get on this sort of blood sugar roller coaster. Our cells start becoming resistant to insulin, and that sets us up for type 2 diabetes, which is a disease of insulin resistance, high blood sugar that we can no longer control. Insulin is also a fat storage hormone, so when we're constantly spiking our insulin levels, we're unable to break down fat. So we care about managing our blood sugar. It's a huge area of preventing disease. What Segal and his team found, though, that some foods like bananas and white rice, so these are high carbohydrate foods, caused a marked increase in blood sugar levels when some study participants ate them, while foods like cookies and ice cream, which are also high in carbohydrates but have a different sort of carbohydrate that they contain, and they also contain fat, had no effect. So one group got this blood sugar spike from bananas and rice, but they didn't get a blood sugar spike from cookies and ice cream. Okay? Instead, the cookies and ice cream kind of like slowly raise their blood sugar levels, and so that's actually a really good sign of good glucose control. There was another group, though, of study participants who experienced the opposite. So a marked spike in blood sugar in response to the sugary foods like ice cream and cookies, and a more gradual response to blood sugar increase when they were eating the bananas and the rice. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? So how do you know where you are? Like, we don't know yet. Okay. So there was one group that did better on like ice cream, cookies, sort of treats, and one group that did better with cereal grains. So Siegel found that an individual has a personalized blood sugar response to certain foods, and this can be predicted by genetics, also your microbiome, right? Because our bacteria have an aid in breaking up the foods. Yeah, Erica's like, it's funny because I definitely feel better eating junk like cookies and way worse eating rice. Yeah, so you may be one of those people that does better when you add your carbohydrates in with a fat. So even if it's like a sugar, like a glucose or fructose containing food, like sucrose is glucose fructose together. It's what tastes sweet in our mouth. But then when you add fat to that, it actually slows your blood sugar release. And then if you eat rice, which is mainly a long chain of glucose, that's actually bad for your blood sugar, even though rice is a healthier food, right? But it's variable. So dietary guidelines are not one size fits all. That's the point of this whole thing. Each individual may have a specific set of foods on which they thrive. So what do? Find your perfect diet. Super easy, right? So how do we find our perfect diet? So there's a life coach I really like called Brooke Castillo. I'm like name dropping in this video a lot. You can always go back to the original article to look at the links that I provide. So Brooke Castillo, she's the author of the Life Coach School podcast. She does a lot of work with emotional eating and food and relationship around food. And she has really useful guidelines that I like because she simplifies things right down. Sometimes it's good to get away from the sciencey people and go down to people who are just speaking to the public about food and how we experience food in our day-to-day lives. And so Castillo suggests 4 questions to ask yourself when eating a specific food to find out if it's right for you. So number 1, does this food taste good to me? And I'm going to get into all of these in more detail in a second. Number 2, does this food feel good in my body? Number 3, how is this food acting in my body? And number 4, is this food helping me get the health results that I want? So number 1, do I like this food? So do eat food that you like. As a naturopathic doctor, I know it doesn't matter how good a particular food may be. If my patient doesn't like it, he or she won't eat it. I can talk about gelatin and pumpkin seeds all I want, and spinach, and people, if they don't like it, they're not going to eat it. I got to find something else to suggest to help people have a more balanced diet. So finding the perfect diet for us involves eating a variety of unprocessed foods. So real foods, right? There's no superfoods. Just real food has tons of micro and macronutrients in it that we need to function. So eating a variety of unprocessed foods that provide us with fuel that we look forward to eating. However, it can take a while to learn what real food tastes like if our palates have been manipulated by the chemically enhanced flavors of processed foods. So sometimes doing this kind of like detox, temporary reset is helpful. And I would suggest working with a professional to do that. So Ayurveda, a 6,000-year-old medicine from India, identifies 6 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, spicy, astringent, and pungent. Astringent is like, it creates like a sucking kind of dry sensation in your mouth. So think like green bananas or green tea or black tea or wine, like a really tanniny wine. And pungent is like garlic and spice. And a healthy diet consists of all 6 tastes, all right? But the standard American diet, it's imbalanced according to Ayurveda, so it contains mostly sweet taste, and it has some salty and sour, which comes from alcohol, added to the mix. But being relatively rare in nature, our palate evolved to prefer these tastes over others because sweet is rarer than bitter taste, for example. Bitter is abundant in antioxidant-rich plants. So in order to balance our diets, we might need to make an effort to consume more bitter or astringent foods from micronutrient-rich leafy green vegetables. And so picking foods that you like is not as simple as it seems, because if I 10 years ago was just going to eat what I liked, it would be tiramisu. So training ourselves to appreciate a variety of tastes may be important for finding a diet that fuels us while also bringing us pleasure. And you'll find that after you sort of retrain your palate, there may be foods that you never liked before that you like a lot, and you start to crave these healthier foods, and you don't feel right if you're not consuming them. So we want to sort of reset that. but you also want to eat what you like. If you really hate, I don't know, fish, it's going to be tough to try and force yourself to eat it. So do pay attention to how food feels in your body. If Aaron Segal's study subjects had experience practicing mindful eating and body awareness, I wonder how many of them would have already known, like Erica just commented, whether their bodies could better tolerate white rice or ice cream. So maybe they had this subjective experience that, like, when I eat a big bowl of rice, I feel kind of shaky and hungry and imbalanced a couple hours later. And when I eat ice cream, I'm okay. Like, I can eat a small bowl. I don't feel like I overeat it. I don't feel like I'm craving sugar the rest of the day. I don't feel like my energy crashes. Like, they may, if they're really paying attention, they may already have known that about themselves, right? So say doing this analysis of genetics in your microbiome, you may be able to tell which of these categories you're in just based on how you feel. If they'd been paying attention to their body's cues, it's possible that they already knew that white rice spiked their blood sugar, and they felt, like I said before, shaky, dizzy, brain foggy, and feelings of lethargy or increased hunger and sugar cravings afterwards. So whenever I see a new patient, I have him or her record their food intake for 2 weeks, along with any symptoms experienced in their bodies. And so partly to understand what they're eating so we can dive in and kind of tweak things, but also this exercise almost always proves useful in a variety of ways because people notice that certain foods make them feel bloated or lethargic or cause headaches, while other foods reduce their cravings and provide them with level energy, and usually there's some insight to gain after doing this food diet tracking. So we're not necessarily tracking for calories or nutrients, we're just tracking for how you feel when you eat certain things. Obviously, there's more variables involved, but this is a good starting place. Paying attention to how our body feels immediately after eating or in the hours following can provide us with invaluable information about the specific effects certain foods have on us. And so some people will tell me that, like, for example, I feel great when I eat red meat, and I know I need to eat red meat on a regular basis to feel good. For me, it feels super anti-inflammatory. I feel great. Even if I'm eating a lot of food, I feel really level. My energy is really good. My appetite is controlled. But a lot of my patients tell me that they cannot tolerate high protein or high meat. This could be an issue with their digestive systems and their pancreatic enzymes breaking down protein in their stomach acid. But it could also just be that it's not, it doesn't suit their body and their microbiome. So you want to consider working with a professional because to answer Brooke Castillo's third guideline question, how is this food acting in my body, you may need to work with someone who understands nutritional biochemistry and physiology. So for example, you may love cheese, you may feel good after you eat it, and there's reasons for that. Cheese kind of increases our oxytocin. It's like gives us like this opioid-like effect, especially if we're sensitive to it. So you might feel good after you eat it. However, unbeknownst to you, cheese may be causing a delayed food sensitivity reaction that produces symptoms many hours to days later and contributes to your symptoms of hormone imbalance. It may be encouraging mucus production or contributing to chronic sinus congestion. It may be doing things in your body that are not good, that are hard to separate when you're just following a diet diary. Or cheese may be the best thing for you ever. I don't want to pick on cheese, except that I can't eat it, so cheese I always scapegoat. So there are different foods, the way that different foods interact with our hormones and immune systems may not be apparent immediately after we ingest them. The effects may be delayed or slowly accumulate over time, and so gaining a professional's view on the impact a food has on our complex bodily systems, including our personalized genetics and our microbiome, can help us understand whether that food has a place in our ideal diet or not. And so a professional combines his or her knowledge of the body with your knowledge of your own body. So both are super important. You can't do one without the other. But also looking at your health history and perhaps blood tests to help you identify which foods might not be right for you. And the best thing to do, honestly, like, do you have a gluten sensitivity, right? How do you find that out? You avoid gluten for a month as diligently as you can. You reintroduce it systematically at the end of that month, for 3 days, like 3 times a day, gluten, 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 all the gluten you want, and you track how you feel. If you feel any symptoms at all, you cut it out again. Give it a few days, reintroduce. That's it. So it's super simple, but again, pretty daunting, and it's good to work with a professional to guide you through that. So do eat foods that support your health goals. So as Hippocrates once said, let food be thy medicine, and as a naturopathic doctor, I believe that nutrition has an important place in disease prevention and healing. Each bite of food we take can have the effect of moving us toward health and away from illness, or the opposite. And so our nutritional requirements will differ depending on our health goals. So a 71-year-old woman who is undergoing chemotherapy and radiation for lung cancer, for example, will be eating a very different diet than her 24-year-old bodybuilding grandson. Right? So one is trying to prevent growth of things while the other is trying to grow muscle and things like that, brain cells, bones. A 42-year-old woman who has polycystic ovaries and hopes to get pregnant in the next year will also have completely different dietary requirements and health goals. She's going to need a ton of micronutrients to support a pregnancy, but she's also going to want to promote fertility, and understanding that her specific health condition, she may do better with a paleo diet or a lower carb diet. And I'm going to answer your question, Stacy, in a sec. You might love the food you eat. It might feel great in your body. Maybe you're eating unprocessed whole foods you prepare at home, and you may have done a food sensitivity test and you're avoiding foods that affect you. However, maybe you're not feeling as amazing as you feel you should. This definitely happens to me, guys. I'm eating like this good diet for me, and I'm like there's something I want to tweak. I might still be feeling bloated. There may be something else going on, so I got to dial it in and figure out what's going on. So, of course, the diet's not everything. There's always tweaks we can make. But perhaps you feel tired or struggle to lose weight, or maybe you suffer from depression or diabetes or daily digestive symptoms. And so, depending on your health goals, a healthcare professional can work with you to find the ultimate nutrition do's and don'ts for your body in particular. And so, Stacey, I'm going to try and open up your comment here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't need to blindly pick on cheese. Like, there are these foods so for food sensitivities, like there are foods that there's something called molecular mimicry, where proteins in the food resemble proteins in our bodies, or cell receptors in our bodies, that our immune system, if it for whatever reason goes after a certain food, like dairy or gluten or eggs, for example, then it can also start attacking body tissues, right? So in things like autoimmune diseases or chronic inflammation, there are certain foods that we target to do an elimination diet on. Also, they tend to be foods that we eat a lot of, because they're just, the exposure that our gut is getting to those foods is more regular, and the probability that we were ingesting those foods while we were super stressed, undergoing a round of antibiotics, suffered from a gut infection, went on a binge drinking week in Mexico, sort of all of those things, like the probability that we were eating one of those foods that we eat often is higher. So it's not often that many people have like an oyster sensitivity if you eat oysters once a year, But that being said, the way that if it affects you, you do an elimination and you reintroduce, and then you see how you feel. And it's usually, so there's some variability in what professionals will say, but the recent research on something like non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is a real condition, but people can't tolerate gluten, but they turn up negative for celiac disease. What these people find is they feel a lot better. Their inflammation goes down when they avoid gluten, and then when they reintroduce it within 24 hours, they notice a reaction. So it's usually pretty quick. You just have to be paying attention. It's often not so subtle, but yeah, you have to do that trial on yourself, because we have to lower the inflammation, let our gut repair, and then challenge it again to really understand how things affect us. The last point, do have courage. So dipping our toes into the deep pool of human nutrition can be daunting, but it's also, I believe, an essential act. So don't shy away from this, because it's so important. And there are people out there like myself, but even people that offer this video, things that can guide you and support you. And so our dietary habits have the power to deeply influence our health. In the words of Anne Wigmore, the food you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And removing processed foods from our kitchens, eating whole foods, cooking at home, eating enough of the right types of fats, developing awareness of how foods feel in our bodies, and considering working with a professional to help us reach our health goals through diet and lifestyle changes can have a powerful impact on the quality of our lives. And clearly there's other factors beyond just food, right? There's sleep, and there's movement, and our environment, and our stress tolerance, and our hormonal balance, and our microbiome, and all of these things. But because food forms this foundation of our health, I think it's a place I always go as one of the first layers that I peel when working with people. And, and it's, I don't want anyone to look at something like that coconut paper and just be like, I'm done, right? I'm just going to eat whatever. Fried, what are those? Chicken fries, there are basic principles and there's context. We can always bring ourselves back to basics, and there's always professionals out there to work with you and your body and to understand what's a good balance for you, what's a good diet for you, and is that diet actually helping you achieve your health goals, whatever those may be, whether it's preventing disease in the future based on a family risk or personal health history, or whether it's optimizing how you feel today. So any questions, leave them below. I'm going to post the link for this original article. Thanks, guys, for being here with me and for listening. And my name is Dr. Talia Marcajani, and you can always email me at connect@taliand.com. Have a great day.